One of the largest and undoubtedly one of the more concerning storms of 2024 is coming to the United States over the next 5 days. And over the next 5 days, we are going to have a risk for severe weather every single day. That begins today and will run all the way through Sunday and perhaps even into Monday, where we are going to be watching for the threat of significant damaging winds, large to very large hail, and tornadoes across a large chunk of the United States. Now, with all this being said, it is a concerning storm, but how concerning really is this, and will you see severe weather? Well, we're going to answer those questions for you in today's forecast, in addition to what you can expect in terms of timing and where the greatest risk of severe weather will be over the next 5 days. Now, I do want to begin first with what's happening right now in the United States today that'll lead to this large storm and where that storm will be over the next 48 hours. We'll begin with the East Coast, and this is an area that is really not going to be talked about much over the next few days. If you live on the East Coast, you're really expecting, for the most part, nice weather. You're at least not going to be seeing any sort of significant severe weather, so that's good news there. So if you're over that direction, you are fine for the next few days. If you're in the Ohio Valley, same thing. We're not really dealing with much, at least for the next few days, but as we go into early next week, there could be some severe weather. We'll be talking about that here in just a moment, including Illinois, by the way. Illinois will be one of the hot spots, I think, for severe weather as we go into the late weekend. Now, for the rest of the country, it's going to get pretty active, especially for the Great Plains and much of the Midwest and perhaps the Western Ohio Valley as we go into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, where severe weather will be a possibility, and we'll talk about more details on that here in a second. But notice right now, there's only some minimal cloud cover across the Great Plains today. This is not our severe weather threat, but we will have a low threat for severe weather across Texas and Oklahoma tonight. That's primarily going to be large hail and damaging winds and maybe a brief tornado, but the bulk of the activity that is going to bring this risk for severe weather is still back over in the Pacific Ocean. Once we have a low pressure system cross over the Rocky Mountains, that is eventually going to bring our risk for some significant severe weather as we go into both Thursday and Friday, and then eventually we are going to get a second storm behind this one that is going to bring our severe weather threat for Saturday, Sunday, and perhaps even into Monday. So really crazy stuff overall. It is going to be a very active next 5 days. There is a high likelihood that we'll at least be live 2 or 3 out of the 4 days over the next 4 to 5 days. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and click the bell icon down below so you're notified when we go live. Now let's talk more about that severe weather potential for the next 5 days. This is where the Storm Prediction Center has at least issued some level risk for severe weather, and it all begins today, which is Wacky Weather Wednesday. We do have a marginal threat of severe weather from Kansas back into Texas. Overall, this is not super concerning. I know we have a slight risk as well, which would technically be a 2 out of 5 on the severe weather scale, but I think overall the storms are going to struggle to develop. Any storms that do end up developing will be primarily composed of some large to very large hail, maybe up to 2.5 inches in diameter, out of an isolated supercell, damaging winds, and perhaps a brief tornado if you're in that yellow shaded area in West Texas. Once again, very small area. The hail threat is a hatched area back over in West Texas, and again, it's a very small area north of Midland. Really, overall, I'm expecting maybe one storm to try to get close to tennis ball sized hail. Pretty similar to what we saw yesterday. If you're anywhere in Central or West Texas, there were a couple of storms out there, very isolated in nature. That's all I'm expecting today here in Texas and Oklahoma. And then there is your tornado risk. It is very low. I am not planning on going live tonight, but we might be going live tomorrow and Friday. And this would be why we have an enhanced risk for severe weather across Kansas, Western Oklahoma, and as well as back into the Texas Panhandle. This is a 3 out of 5 on the severe weather scale, so definitely make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts if you're in the orange shaded area. But even if you're outside of this, we have a marginal threat that goes back up into Wyoming, even down into Mexico, and as well as back over into South Dakota. Now, overall, the main concern, once again, will be in the orange and yellow shaded areas where there will be the greatest risk for severe weather. I do want to mention that this is still a little bit uncertain whether storms will develop or not, but if they do develop, which it seems likely they will, I do think we're going to have enough ascent, and I think we're going to overall have enough ingredients here for there to be severe storms, but there is still a potential that they do not develop. But as long as they develop, we are going to be talking about some significant, robust supercells capable of primarily large to very large hail. This is the greatest concern. We have a red shaded area here, which would represent the 30% probability within a 25-mile radius of seeing large hail, and then that hatched area would also represent that we have a chance of seeing greater than 2-inch diameter hail. High likelihood that we'll at least have 1 or 2 storms that get close to tennis ball sized hail. We might even have an isolated storm get close to baseball sized hail, or maybe even a bit greater than that. And then the tornado risk is elevated tomorrow. We do have a hatched 10% tornado risk across western Oklahoma, much of Kansas, and as well as the Texas Panhandle. This is a 10% chance within a 25-mile radius of tornadoes. In addition to that, it also represents the chance of seeing a strong tornado. So an EF2 plus tornado cannot be ruled out tomorrow. But once again, I do want to mention that there is still some uncertainty here whether storms develop. I'll give it about a 70% chance that storms develop. And as long as they do develop, we'll be talking about some significant severe weather. I will be talking about timing and scenarios on that here in just a couple of minutes. Once we go into Flying Fences Friday, things get a little bit more interesting because we are talking about a much larger area, but not necessarily a much higher risk at this point. The Storm Prediction Center has kept a slight risk for severe weather from Texas back into Iowa. This is a 2 out of 5 on the severe weather scale. I would not be surprised if we have some sort of enhanced risk for severe weather, but the exact area of where the most significant severe weather will happen does still remain quite uncertain. Overall, the main concern for Friday will be damaging winds, large hail, and as well as a few tornadoes. So definitely make sure that you're staying vigilant and weather aware on Friday. Saturday gets a little bit more scary for Scary Storm Saturday. We do have a slight risk for severe weather from literally up the upper Michigan Peninsula, which is a really weird stretch, by the way. This slight risk is awfully weird. It goes into a very thin corridor across Wisconsin and back into western Illinois. It goes all the way back down to Texas, though, and we also have an enhanced risk for severe weather from Kansas, Oklahoma, and back into Texas. I do want to point out that we are going to have two different storms producing the threat of severe weather. The first low pressure system, which is bringing our severe weather on both Thursday and Friday, will bring the risk on Saturday across that thin corridor, and then this second storm that develops will be bringing the risk for severe weather across Kansas, as well as Texas, and as well as Oklahoma. Now, the main concern will be damaging winds and isolated large hail, maybe an isolated tornado or two back up in the Midwest, but if you're back down in the southern or central plains, that is where it's going to be more concerning. That is where we're going to be dealing with the threat for damaging winds, large to very large hail, and a few tornadoes, and a couple of strong tornadoes cannot be ruled out on Saturday. So with all that being said, there are a couple of curveballs that could kind of mix up the severe weather event on Saturday. The first of which is that we are going to be dealing with an early round of convection, most likely at least, across Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. If this happens, we'll be dealing with more of a damaging wind threat with a couple of embedded tornadoes during the late morning into the early afternoon hours. You'll see this here in just a couple of minutes, but if storms end up firing off instead during the late afternoon and evening, the overall ingredients are just going to be much more favorable for a tornado risk. So that's going to be something to watch for. If we end up seeing more storms during the morning, that could hinder the development of storms in the afternoon and evening. And also the other curveball is that I have a final exam during Saturday afternoon. So hopefully I can go live at some point on Saturday, but I'm not sure what exact time that'll be. So just make sure that you're subscribed to the channel and I'll keep you posted with the latest on that. Once we go into Sunday, we have another slight risk for severe weather from Texas back into Wisconsin and Illinois. The main concern on Sunday will be damaging winds, hail, and maybe a few tornadoes. Overall, the severe weather threat slightly lower for now comparably to Saturday, but that could obviously always change. I do think overall the most concerning days are going to be Friday and Saturday, and even Sunday could be in its own regard depending on how things evolve on both Friday and Saturday. So just make sure you're staying tuned. We'll keep you posted with the latest on everything that evolves over the next few days. Now let's break down the timing for you day by day, beginning with tonight. A couple of isolated supercells will develop either in central Oklahoma or back over in West Texas. Overall, this does not look to be super concerning. It's mainly a hail and wind threat. Just make sure you're taking the proper precautions. After midnight, all that storm activity weakens. Tomorrow remains a little bit more uncertain. The HRRR model does not show any storms firing up in that area where the hatched tornado risk is, which would be good news. We wouldn't be dealing with really any severe weather in this case, other than a round of storms developing during the late evening and into the overnight hours across West Texas and eventually moving into Oklahoma and Texas. This would be mainly a damaging wind risk as we go into Friday, but one model that does show this much more clearly with the potential for strong tornadoes in addition to the threat for significant hail is going to be the HRW model. And I don't usually show this one too often, but it gives you a better resemblance here of where we could see a couple of discrete cells fire off, one of which would be back over maybe northeast Colorado with more of a hail risk near that warm frontal boundary, and then also back over in Oklahoma, Kansas, and as well as Texas right during around 5 to 6 o'clock where those significant supercells could fire off, where damaging winds, large hail, and a significant tornado risk would exist. And then that second round of storms would develop behind that with mainly a damaging wind risk as we go into Friday morning. There are a couple of scenarios here. Which one ends up happening, we'll basically have to wait and see. It's slightly more likely that we will have some discrete supercells firing off there tomorrow afternoon, but if not, the the HRRR model is basically best case scenario where there would be very limited storm coverage during the afternoon and evening. Now, beyond Thursday, we'll be dealing with some storms as we go into Friday. They'll be a bit more widespread in nature. Main concern will be damaging winds, hail, and a few tornadoes. It's going to be a much more numerous and widespread day of storm activity, not necessarily severe weather, but we'll definitely be dealing with some severe storms. Once we go into Saturday morning, a couple of rounds of severe storms, the first of which will be during the afternoon hours across Wisconsin, eastern Iowa, and the upper Michigan Peninsula, and then we'll be dealing with the other round of storms across Kansas, Texas, and Oklahoma that'll develop during the late morning into the afternoon, with damaging winds, large hail, and a few tornadoes being possible. And then notice as we go into late Saturday night, another round of storms will fire off, and that one will also produce a threat for damaging winds, large hail, and a few tornadoes. By Sunday, this all moves to the east, where there will still be some significant severe weather from Texas back into Illinois. And then once we go into Monday, there will probably be some sort of low risk for severe weather, either from about Michigan back into Indiana and as well as into Louisiana, or it might be a bit smaller, perhaps just up in here. But overall, the main concern will be large hail and damaging winds. And then by Tuesday, we should hopefully be done for a little bit with severe weather, and then maybe something returning by next weekend, but that remains extremely uncertain at this point. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.